In this lesson, we're going to talk about the switch statement. The switch statement is similar to an if statement in some ways. It has some nuance difference that I'll talk about in a moment. But basically, the switch statement is a control of flow expression. It's a statement that selects a given switch to execute based on a list of candidates. So think of a railroad switch where the train comes to a possible fork in the road, and the switch will switch between several different options and direct the train's flow given the destination and what the payload is in the train and so on. Same here. You change the block of code that'll execute based on the value of some expression. And so you're probably going to wonder why you would choose a switch statement over an if statement. And first of all, as you're going to see in this demonstration, it's a little bit more flexible. You're able to do things with a switch statement that you're not able to do with an if, at least not inherently. You could probably perform some workaround, but it's just not as concise as the switch statement. Secondly, it works great whenever you're evaluating pure equality. So I want to see what the value of my variable is. It's either this or this or this or this. It's less useful whenever you're trying to do things like the try-parse and any kind of expression evaluation. It can do simple evaluations of expressions, but that's not really its wheelhouse, like the if statement. And then finally, as we're going to see at the very end, it works great with enums. In fact, there's some magic built in with enums that Visual Studio kind of enables, and I'm excited to show you that. Okay, so let's suppose that we have, as you can see, I have a project CSASP054, and I have a single result label on that web page. And you can pause to catch up with me here, but I'm going to type in most of this example and kind of walk through it. So the way you create a switch statement is pretty easy. In fact, there is a shortcut, a code snippet that you can use and that I would encourage you. Just SW tab, and that will give you the basic construct of the switch statement. You're going to have to add quite a bit in this case, but later on we're going to see how it works with enums. At any rate, let's go ahead and evaluate switch expression, and we're going to perform different switches based on whatever the value of switch expression is. So you use a series of labels called cases, and so you do a case like a case 0, for example, and then maybe a case 1. So here's two different labels, and inside of each label you kind of got a code block, but they call them switches or something along those lines. I'm not sure what the exact terminology is. Let me see here. I may have it written down. Yeah, switch section, I guess is what they call it. But at any rate, you would do something like this. And whoops, let's go. And you can do the same thing here. Now notice when I do these that I'm getting red squigglies beneath each one of them, and it says control cannot flow through from one case label to another. And so what that's really talking about is the need for some control at the end of the switch. And typically you're going to use the break, and what the break will do will pop you out of the switch and continue on with the rest of the logic in your code. But there's other options here as well that you'll see. You can also just return, which will pop you out not only of the switch but also of the method. So we could actually say, okay, let's go ahead and set the result equal to that. Now we're not really doing anything with it here. Let me go result label.text equals result. But you certainly could do that. And then there's a couple of other options we're going to look at in a minute. But for now, let's just use breaks. So let's add a break there and a break there. And we're going to get the result that you would probably expect, well, after I add a break. And we'll go ahead and run the application. And you'll see we hit case 0. Because switch expression was 0, it hits the first label, and it runs the first switch. Now you'll notice here that we have a default switch. Let's go ahead and do result plus equals default, And so if we were to change the switch expression to 2, we're going to hit the default. And this is kind of the catch-all. If any of the other labels don't catch the switch, then it will fall out to the default, which is kind of will catch any value that comes through. Okay? But let's go and take a look at some more advanced cases here. Also, let me say one more thing. The default is optional. Let me go ahead and just put that. All right, now let's look at some advanced cases here. What we can also do is add more than one label to a switch. So we can do this, for example. Let me delete that part. So now either 0 or 1 will trigger this switch. So if I set this to 1 and run the application, I would expect to see case 0 or 1. Great. Whereas if we go to case 2, we would do, result plus equals case 2, and we already know what we would expect to see there. Now, here's one interesting thing. I said that you can add a break statement or a return statement, and I talked about how that will either pop you out of the switch or the entire method using the return, respectively. So, for example, if you were to do return here and then go result plus equals some result, it doesn't really even matter, because at this point you will exit out of the entire method. You can see that we get a little green squiggly that says warning, unreachable code detected. So this won't work. You don't add some logic beneath a return if you're going to use that inside of a case. So let me put unreachable. And let's go ahead and get rid of the return as well. Now what you can do is go to case 1, and now it will reperform the switch after it evaluates the first case switch. It'll go to case 1 and perform that switch. So let's go ahead and run that. Actually, let's change up our value here so we actually hit that case. Okay, so we see that it first fired off case 2, and then the go to case 1 fired off our case 0 or 1. Very cool. You can also perform some simple expressions here, like the example that they often give is 7 minus 4, for example, and that would equal 3. So we would do result plus equals case 3, and then return. Whoops. Colon, not a semicolon. And let's change that to 3, just to show you that you can perform simple expressions inside of that. Let's move that to break. Now let's run it. Okay, we hit case 3. So again, simple expressions there. And then the last thing that you can do to break out of a case is to do a throw. So you can throw an exception. So let's go here, and we're going to talk about exceptions soon, but let's just do result plus equals case 4. It won't matter because, as you'll see in a moment, things will basically die, and we'll get the yellow screen of death, I think, if we change the case. There we go. Since we're in debug mode, we don't hit the yellow screen of death, but we essentially get an unhandled exception. We'll talk about exceptions later. So let's comment all of this out, and I want to show you how we can use switch statements with enumerations. So let's set up the example. I'm going to pull from the previous example on enumerations, and I'm just going to copy and paste some code here. So we're creating a new character class with a name and type. Type is of type character type, which we define as an enum. It can only be wizard, fighter, or monster. All right, so that's from the previous example. Now watch this. This is the cool part. Let's go ahead and set up create a new instance of the new character like so. And so now that I've set the hero's type to one of the character type enumerations, watch this. I'm going to go SW tab tab. And now I want to create a series of cases based on the hero.type. So I've typed that in, and now I'm going to hit return on my keyboard twice. And when I do, notice how it blows out all the possible options as cases. It saves you a lot of time, especially if you have a large set of values in the enumeration. So here now I can do result plus, whoops, let's go string result. And I think you know where we're going from here. I'm going to make it real simple on myself. So let's run the application. We would expect to see this case fire off since our new character is of type fighter. All right, and it works. Great. Okay, so that's pretty exciting. Again, you're not going to want to use the switch all the time. It has its special usages, especially when you're working with enumerations, especially when you need a little more flexibility, like some of the things that we looked at here, especially with the go-to case. Especially when you have a select number of cases that you need to provide for, and you need to check their quality against some switch expression, and then also whenever you just need a default. And again, yes, you could do this with an if statement, but this is a little bit more elegant in certain situations. All right, so that is the switch statement. Pretty cool stuff. We're going to use that in our next project, so make sure that you understand what we just did here, and let's continue on in the next lesson. Thank you.